I clocked out of Denver Health later than expected, the kind of exhausting night that made every step feel heavier than the last. The automatic doors slid shut behind me as the cold Colorado air rushed in, sharp enough to sting the skin beneath my scrubs. It was 2:17 in the morning, and the parking lot looked washed out under the harsh yellow lamps, the thin dusting of snow reflecting the light in patches. I dug through my bag for my keys, already dreaming of the quiet of my apartment and the relief of hot water on my sore shoulders. My breath curled into faint clouds as I walked toward my old Subaru, listening to the distant hum of the hospital generators. That is when I heard it, a voice I had not heard in more than 2 decades. My name, spoken softly but edged like a blade. Emily. I froze the sound, cutting through the cold more sharply than the wind. I turned slowly, and my chest tightened until it hurt. Standing at the front of my car was Linda, my biological mother, wrapped in a coat too thin for the winter night. Her posture was rigid, her expression unreadable in a way that made my stomach twist. Next to her stood Thomas, my father by blood, and nothing else, arms crossed as if he were waiting for someone to explain why this meeting mattered. A few feet behind him, leaning against a light pole with a smirk that had not changed since childhood, was Kyle, my older brother, the one they kept when they abandoned me at 10. My fingers tightened around my keys. For a moment, I could not move or speak. 24 years without a word, and suddenly they were all here, standing between me and my car, like ghosts that had clawed their way out of the past. Linda stepped closer, the snow crunching under her boots. Her voice carried clearly through the empty lot. "We left you because you were useless. Kyle was the child worth keeping." Her words sliced through the air, and I felt something inside me jolt a shock so deep it made the smokers near the ambulance bay turn their heads. Before I could respond, Thomas tossed an envelope at my feet. It landed on the snow with a dull flap. "Sign these. Your adoptive father did not earn that money. It belongs to the child we chose." My legs moved back on instinct. Kyle pushed himself away from the pole and walked toward me with a swagger that made my skin crawl. "Dad left you $5.5 million, he said, voice dripping with mockery. "Cute. We will take it now." My hands shook as I lifted the key fob and unlocked the car, the headlights flashing weakly. I pulled the door open, but before I could slip inside, Kyle grabbed a fistful of my jacket and slammed me against the metal. Pain burst through my shoulder, sudden and sharp, though not enough to break anything. A man near the smoking area shouted, "Hey, leave her alone!" Kyle did not even glance at him. "Shut up. This is family business." The word family hit harder than the shove. My pulse thundered in my ears as I pushed against him, but he held on the same way he used to pin me against the wall when our parents were not watching. I hated how easily the old fear came back. Linda stepped closer, her breath visible in the cold. She leaned in until her face was inches from mine. "Your adoptive daddy is not here to protect you anymore." Something in me snapped. Maybe it was survival or instinct or the final thread of fear breaking loose, but I twisted hard, slipping out of Kyle's grip and stumbling toward the driver's seat. I fell into the car, slammed the door shut, and hit the lock with my elbow. Kyle pounded on the window, his voice muffled but furious. Thomas shouted across the lot, "See you in court!" Linda stared at me through the glass with an expression so empty it chilled me more than the winter air. Then she turned away. When they finally walked off, my breath collapsed into a sob. I could not hold back. I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel, shaking the pain in my shoulder. Nothing compared to the realization settling like ice in my chest. After 24 years of silence, my biological family had come back for one reason and one reason only. The $5.5 million my adoptive father left me. I did not know it then, but what happened in the parking lot that night was only the beginning. I was 10 years old the day my life split in two, though at the time I did not understand what was happening or why the ground beneath me suddenly felt like it was giving way. I grew up in Fort Collins, Colorado, in a small beige house with peeling paint and a yard my parents never bothered to maintain. From the outside, it looked like any ordinary home, the kind where kids play on the sidewalk and mothers call their children in for dinner, but inside it felt different. It felt smaller, colder, like I was a guest in a place that was supposed to hold love, but never truly did. My brother Kyle was 13, then tall for his age and already carrying the air of someone who believed the world owed him everything he wanted. My parents adored him. They praised him for breathing, celebrated every tiny thing he did, and brushed aside every wrong he committed. He had new shoes every school year, a bike, a room full of video games, and a birthday party with balloons, and a backyard tent one year. I remember watching him unwrap a skateboard while our father clapped proudly, and our mother wiped fake tears from her eyes, saying he was destined for great things. All the while, I sat behind them on the sofa unnoticed, wearing clothes an inch too short and chewing the inside of my cheek to keep from crying. The older I get, the more I understand that neglect can feel quiet. It does not always come with shouting or bruises. Sometimes it comes with the simple crushing truth that you are invisible in the place where you should matter most. I was often forgotten at school pickup. My mother once left me waiting in the snow for almost an hour because Kyle had an after-school basketball scrimmage she remembered at the last minute. They rarely asked about my grades. I had fevers that went untreated, scraped knees, nightmares, and lost teeth that nobody cared to see. On weekends, my father and Kyle would disappear to hiking trips or fishing excursions, leaving me behind to do chores my mother said I was old enough to handle, though she never asked Kyle to help. Even then, Kyle knew he had a special status in the family. He used it like a shield and sometimes a weapon. When my mother scolded him for something which was rare, he would point at me and say, "I did it." She always believed him. When he shoved me or took my toys, they said boys would be boys. When he called me useless or stupid, they told me not to provoke him. I learned to live small, to shrink into corners, to speak softly so I would not be accused of causing trouble. Yet nothing could have prepared me for the day they decided to erase me entirely. It was a gray December afternoon, the kind where the sky looks heavy and the cold settles deep into your skin. My mother told me we were going to Walmart to pick up a few things for the house. I remember being oddly excited about it because it meant I could walk through the aisle with the paint sets, and maybe if she was in a good mood, she would let me look at them for a few minutes. Art was the one thing that made me feel like I had some tiny piece of the world for myself. We walked into the store together. I held the sleeve of her coat as I often did, a habit I never grew out of because it was the only form of closeness she allowed me. She moved fast, her boots clicking against the tile as she steered us toward the toy section. I did not understand why we were going there. Kyle was the one who always got something, not me. She stopped near the middle of the aisle, right between the plastic dollhouse sets and the boxes of board games. She knelt down to meet my eyes and spoke with a softness I almost mistook for affection. "Mommy will be right back, sweetheart. 2 minutes. Just wait right here." And then she stood, turned the corner, and walked away without looking back. I waited. I looked at the clock display on the wall. 2 minutes passed, then 5, then 10. I started to feel the first curl of fear tug at my stomach. I wandered to the end of the aisle, expecting to see her comparing prices or talking to someone. She was nowhere. I walked a little farther. I checked the end caps, the craft aisle, the candy aisle. Nothing. My throat tightened. My hands began to shake. I called out for her, but my voice was drowned by people talking and carts rolling past. I do not remember how long I searched. I only remember the moment a store employee found me crying near the entrance and the way his expression changed when I told him I could not find my mother. He took me to the security room where I sat in a chair far too big for me while men in blue vests checked the surveillance monitors. One of them asked me what my parents looked like. I described them as best as I could. They reviewed the footage and asked me to look. I saw my mother walking toward the exit with a hurried stride. I saw my father outside, holding open the passenger door of the car. I watched him place a firm hand on her back and guide her into the seat. Then he shut the door, walked around to the driver's side, and drove away. They did not pause. They did not look around. They did not come back. The store manager called the police. Officers arrived and tried to reassure me, but I could see in their faces that reassurance was a lie. Hours later, a man with gray hair and gentle eyes walked into the room. Dr. Henry Hart. He had been shopping in the store when an officer asked him to wait as a potential witness. When he saw me sitting alone on the hard plastic chair, his eyes softened. Something in him recognized something in me, though neither of us understood it in that moment. He offered to stay with me while the officers attempted to reach my parents. They tried over and over. No one answered. And that was the night my biological family left me behind forever, and the night a stranger stepped forward and changed the course of my life. The hours after my parents drove away from that Walmart blended into a blur of cold fluorescent lights and voices that blurred together, but the one constant in that blur was the presence of Dr. Henry Hart. At first, he simply stood nearby, speaking quietly to the officers, while I sat in the plastic chair with my legs dangling, my fingers twisting the frayed end of my sweater. Every now and then he would glance at me with a look that carried more concern than anyone in my family had ever shown. I remember the moment he approached. He moved slowly as if he did not want to frighten me and crouched down to my level. His eyes were a soft hazel with lines at the corners that deepened when he offered me a small smile. "You look cold, sweetheart," he said gently. "Would you like a warm drink?" I nodded because the truth was I could barely feel my hands anymore. Someone from the staff brought me a cup of hot chocolate in a foam cup, and I held it tightly, letting the warmth seep into my palms. Dr. Hart sat in the chair across from me, not leaning forward, not pushing for questions, but simply existing in a way that made the silence feel less terrifying. He asked for my name, and when I whispered Emily, he repeated it with a calmness that made it feel safe. "Emily, the officers are trying to reach your parents," he said. "They will let us know as soon as they hear back." I did not have the words then to explain the sinking feeling in my chest, the one telling me they would not answer. The officers called again and again. They left messages. They tried the landline listed on school records. No response. After 2 hours, the store had closed to the public and employees were cleaning aisles under dimmed lights. One of the officers returned, kneeling down beside me with a heavy expression. "Your parents have not responded," he said. "We will keep trying, but for now we want to make sure you are safe." His words should have frightened me, but instead, there was a strange numbness settling inside me, as if my mind understood something my heart had not caught up to yet. They were not coming back. They had left me there on purpose, and I was completely alone. That was when Dr. Hart cleared his throat, a quiet sound but full of intention. "Officer," he said, "if you need someone to stay with her until social services arrives, I can wait. I am not in a hurry." He sat beside me for what must have been another full hour, telling me small stories about the places he had lived while serving as a military doctor. He did not speak loudly or dramatically. His voice had a steady rhythm that felt like a blanket around my shaking nerves. He told me about snowstorms in Alaska, the desert sun in New Mexico, and how he once delivered a baby in a grocery store parking lot when he had been off duty. I found myself listening despite everything. Eventually, one of the officers asked Dr. Hart if he would accompany them to a nearby station so they could continue the paperwork, as it was clear my parents were not coming back that night. He agreed without hesitation. I remember the way he placed his coat around my shoulders as we walked out of the store. It smelled faintly of cedar and something like peppermint. At the station, the reality of my situation began to unfold in slow, painful pieces. The officers explained that they would continue trying to locate my parents, but since I had been left unattended and there was clear evidence from the surveillance footage, Child Protective Services had been notified. Dr. Hart stayed in the lobby, speaking occasionally with the officers refusing to leave, even when they assured him he did not need to remain. At some point, a social worker arrived. Her name was Ms. Daniels, and she knelt in front of me with a clipboard and a soft voice, trying to make me feel comfortable while she filled out forms. She asked if I had relatives nearby. I shook my head. She asked if I had anyone I trusted. I could not think of a single name. She scanned the room briefly, and her eyes landed on Dr. Hart. "Has this man been here with you the whole time?" I nodded. She approached him, speaking quietly, and something passed between them in a brief conversation I would not fully understand until years later. She returned to me, smiling softly. "Emily," she said, "because of the circumstances and because he has volunteered, Dr. Hart has offered to stay with you tonight if you feel safe with him. It is not a permanent arrangement, but it will keep you from having to stay in the holding facility. Do you feel comfortable with that?" I looked across the room at him, sitting with his hands folded, giving me space even now. I nodded again. He stood and walked over, lowering himself to my level like he had in the store. "We will take it one step at a time," he said. "I will make sure you are okay tonight." He took me to a diner on the way to his home, buying me pancakes even though it was nearly midnight. He let me choose between chocolate chips or blueberries. Nobody had ever done that for me. At his house, he gave me a guest room and fresh pajamas from a sealed package he happened to have. I later learned he kept extras for when his nieces visited. He did not ask about my parents. He did not ask what had happened in the store. He only said, "If you need anything, I am right down the hall." I cried myself to sleep that night, but for the first time, someone was close enough to hear me if I called out. Over the next days, he worked with CPS signing temporary guardianship papers, attending interviews, getting background checks, and opening his home to their inspections. Not once did he flinch or hesitate. He cooked for me, drove me to school, and checked my homework. He asked what I liked and what scared me. No one had ever cared enough to ask. When the state eventually approved him as a foster guardian, he looked at me with the gentlest seriousness and said, "I would be honored to take care of you, Emily." And for the first time since the day my parents walked out of that store, I felt like maybe I was not completely alone after all. Moving into Dr. Hart's home felt like stepping into a world I had only seen through windows or on television, a world where warmth existed in more than just the temperature of a room. His house in Fort Collins was modest, a two-bedroom place with creaky floors and walls covered in framed photographs of his years in the military and snapshots of nieces, nephews, and old friends. Every picture seemed to hold a memory of someone he cared about, and at first it felt strange to think I was now living inside someone else's life, when the family I came from had erased me without a second thought. But Dr. Hart welcomed me with a kindness that never felt forced. He treated me like a person, not a responsibility he had been burdened with, and certainly not like a mistake he had to fix. In those early days, he approached everything slowly and gently, careful not to overwhelm me. He asked if I preferred pancakes or cereal for breakfast, whether I liked taking baths or showers, and if I wanted the nightlight on or off. Nobody had ever asked my preferences before. It felt unreal that my answers mattered. The first weekend after CPS approved the temporary guardianship, he took me to a small music shop downtown. The bell above the door jingled when we walked in, and I felt a mixture of awe and confusion as he guided me toward a section filled with beginner keyboards. He knelt beside me and said, "I remember you looking at the piano books in Walmart. I thought you might like to try." My throat tightened. I nodded, unable to speak, for fear that the moment would vanish if I breathed too hard. He bought a simple keyboard with weighted keys, and on the way home, he hummed lightly, tapping out imaginary rhythms on the steering wheel. That night, he helped me set it up in the spare room and told me I could play it any time before 9 o'clock. I touched the keys tentatively at first, the sound fragile and uneven, but each soft note felt like a piece of my heart waking up. He also enrolled me in swimming lessons at the community center, explaining that he had always believed every child should know how to swim for safety. I was nervous on the first day, clutching my towel against my chest and wishing I could disappear into it. But the instructors were patient, and after practice, my muscles felt warm and loose, a feeling I had never known. Dr. Hart waited in the bleachers every time reading a book, but looking up to check on me every few minutes. When I graduated from the beginner level class, he took a picture with an old camera and told me how proud he was. I stared at the picture for hours that night, unable to comprehend the weight of someone being proud of me. At school, the changes came slowly. I was still quiet, still nervous around other kids, still afraid of doing anything that might draw attention, but knowing there was someone at home who cared softened something inside me. I began raising my hand more often. I sat with a girl named Lily during lunch because she shared her crayons with me one day without asking for anything in return. My teachers noticed I smiled more. Even my posture changed, as if my spine had learned it was allowed to stand straighter. At home, evenings became predictable in a way that soothed me. Dr. Hart cooked simple dinners, things like chicken soup, baked potatoes, or spaghetti with too much garlic. We ate together at the small round table by the window. He asked about my day and listened to my answers with an attentiveness so genuine it startled me. Some nights he told stories from his time in the military. Never violent ones, but the kinds that showed the importance of camaraderie, resilience, and doing the right thing, even when it is difficult. I learned later that he edited many of those stories for my sake. He wanted me to understand strength without fearing it. One evening, he came home with a used bicycle that he found at a garage sale. It was blue with a missing reflector and handlebars wrapped in faded tape. He spent an hour in the driveway tightening bolts and adjusting the seat while I watched from the steps, my heart thrumming with a mix of excitement and disbelief. When he handed it to me, he said, "Every kid should have a bike." I rode it in small circles while he cheered from the sidewalk, clapping every time I found my balance for longer than a few seconds. Those little moments, ones that other children might take for granted, felt monumental to me. They were proof that I existed, that someone saw me, that someone wanted me to grow. As winter turned into spring, something inside me bloomed. I laughed more. I slept better. My nightmares faded. I started leaving drawings on the fridge, sketches of mountains, flowers, or the piano from the music store. Dr. Hart hung every single one as if it were priceless art. Sometimes I caught him looking at them with a soft smile when he thought I was not paying attention. It is strange how quickly a child can heal when given space and care. But even in that new sense of safety, shadows of my past lingered. I jumped whenever someone raised their voice. I froze if a door slammed unexpectedly. I worried that if I made one wrong move, Dr. Hart would change his mind and send me away. One night, sensing my fear, he sat beside me on the old sofa and said, "Emily, you do not have to earn your place here. You already belong." His voice was steady, but his eyes carried a deep sadness, as if he knew exactly what it felt like to lose something important. It was the first time I truly believed I might be safe. That spring, CPS finalized my long-term placement with him. He took me to celebrate with ice cream at a small shop where the owner knew him by name. I remember sitting across from him, dripping vanilla on my wrist, and feeling something unfamiliar bloom in my chest. Hope. A small, trembling hope that maybe life could be different, that maybe love did not have to hurt. And slowly, piece by piece, I learned what a childhood was supposed to feel like. Growing up with Dr. Hart as my guardian changed the shape of my world in ways I could not understand at first, because the idea of having a father who cared about me felt foreign, almost mythical, like a story other kids whispered about but I had never been allowed to touch. He was patient in a way I had never seen in adults before. He never raised his voice when I made mistakes, never sighed in frustration when I struggled with homework, never dismissed my feelings as dramatic or inconvenient. Instead, he listened. He always listened. When I came home upset because a girl in class made fun of my glasses, he sat beside me on the couch and said, "You know, when I was your age, I had glasses too. Kids teased me just like that, but I learned something important. Glasses are a sign that you see the world clearly, and seeing clearly, Emily, is a gift. Nobody had ever reframed my pain like that. It made me feel seen in a way that softened the sting of the comment, and I watched him carefully, as if studying how he managed to make a hard moment feel gentler. He taught me how to garden in the spring, planting tomatoes and herbs in a small patch of soil behind the house. I loved digging my hands into the dirt, feeling the cool earth under my fingers while he explained how roots needed room to grow just like people did. On early Saturday mornings, we cooked breakfast together. He let me measure out flour even when I spilled half of it on the counter. He laughed and brushed it onto the floor with a towel, saying a messy kitchen was a sign of a good meal. He made me feel like my presence added something instead of taking something away. We built new routines, ones that wrapped around me like the blanket my mother used to ignore. On weeknights, I practiced piano while he read in his armchair. Some evenings, he hummed along to the melodies, a habit that always made me smile. He checked my homework without making me feel stupid for needing help. He came to every parent-teacher conference, shaking hands with my teachers and asking questions about how I was doing socially and academically, as if my life mattered deeply to him. And in time, I realized it did. He cared about my future in a way nobody ever had. When I started middle school, I struggled with math, often staring at the numbers until they blurred. Instead of telling me to try harder or dismissing my confusion, he scheduled weekly tutoring sessions at the local library, sitting with me during each one so I would not feel alone. Everything he did was intentional, guiding me toward a stronger version of myself while never forcing me to be anything I was not. But what impacted me the most were the quiet moments, the ones where his actions spoke louder than any words. When I woke up one night from a nightmare, shaking and crying because I dreamed my parents abandoned me again, he sat at the foot of my bed and kept the lamp on while I calmed down, assuring me he was not going anywhere. When I was afraid to join the school choir because I thought my voice was too small, he told me it was not the volume of a voice that mattered, but the truth behind it. When I questioned why he chose me, why he took in a girl with no belongings and no real reason to trust adults, he looked at me with a sincerity that shook something loose inside me. "I chose you because you deserved someone who would stay," he said, "and I was in a place in my life where I could finally give what I did not have as a child. Stability, safety, love." I never forgot those words. As the years passed, he began to slow down. Age crept into his movements, making him wince when he bent over to tie his shoes. Some mornings, he walked around the house with a slight limp that he blamed on an old knee injury from his service days. His hair thinned, his hands grew more lined, but his spirit never dimmed. He still kept every drawing I made pinned to the fridge. He still clapped when I mastered a new piano piece. He still left encouraging notes in my lunchbox even after I insisted that kids my age did not do that anymore. He found humor in everything from the neighborhood squirrels stealing tomatoes to the way I always overcooked toast. His laughter filled our little house in a way that made it impossible to ever feel alone again. When I entered high school and mentioned wanting to become a nurse, his face lit up with a pride I had only ever imagined parents showing in movies. He took me to volunteer fairs, open houses at local hospitals, and even bought me a stethoscope for my 16th birthday. He told me his years as a military doctor had taught him that healers were the backbone of the world, and he believed I had the heart for it. His encouragement shaped my path not with pressure, but with possibility. Having him as a father figure made me realize what I had been missing all those years with my biological family. Love was not supposed to hurt or belittle or abandon. Love was supposed to lift you, protect you, and help you grow into yourself without fear. I watched him age with a tenderness I did not know I could feel. I learned to brew his tea the way he liked, with 1 teaspoon of honey and a hint of lemon. I reminded him to take his medication when he began forgetting. I drove him to appointments once he felt less comfortable behind the wheel. Our roles shifted gradually, but the trust between us only deepened. One evening, as we watched the sunset from the back porch, he said something that would stay with me for the rest of my life. "Emily, someday, your past may return. And if it does, I want you to remember this. They may have abandoned you, but they did not define you. You are stronger than what they left you with." I nodded, not fully understanding the weight of his words, not knowing that years later they would echo painfully in my mind on the night my biological family suddenly stepped back into my life with fists, accusations, and greed. But in that moment, under that orange sky, all I knew was the value of a father's love and how deeply it had reshaped me. Losing Dr. Hart felt like losing the ground beneath my feet, as if the foundation of my life had been pulled out from under me without warning, leaving me suspended between grief and disbelief. I was 28 when it happened, old enough to understand death in a clinical sense, because I worked around it every day at Denver Health, but completely unprepared for what it meant when it came for the one person who had ever made me feel chosen. He had been slowing down for years, his steps a little shorter, his breathing a little heavier, but he still insisted he was fine. Still insisted he did not want to burden me with every ache that came with age. I tried to ignore the fear that built in my chest whenever he rubbed his sternum or sat down a little too quickly after climbing the stairs. One Sunday morning, I stopped by his house with groceries, something I had started doing weekly because cooking tired him out. I found him sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, untouched in front of him, staring at the steam as if it were telling him something. When he looked up, he smiled, but it was weaker than usual. I asked if he was feeling all right. He said he was just tired. We spent the afternoon together watching an old war documentary that he loved. He fell asleep halfway through, his head tilted back, his breaths uneven. I covered him with a blanket and sat beside him, listening to the soft hum of the television. I did not know that would be the last time I saw him alive. 3 days later, during a night shift at the hospital, a fellow nurse approached me with the expression every medical worker recognizes immediately something terrible has happened. She took my arm and guided me into a quiet hallway. "Emily, there was a call from the paramedics. They responded to a cardiac arrest at your father's address." My ears rang. The hallway seemed to tilt. I knew even before she said the words. "They tried for 26 minutes, she whispered. "They could not revive him." I felt myself collapse inward. I remember hearing my own voice, a sound somewhere between a sob and a gasp, echoing down the empty hallway. I left the hospital still in my scrubs, still trembling, and went straight to his house, where the lights of the ambulance had already disappeared. The quiet in that living room felt wrong, like the world had stopped moving. His glasses were still on the table, his slippers still by the couch, the blanket I had pulled over him still folded neatly on the armrest. I sat down and cried in a way I had not cried since the night he first brought me there as a child. Losing him was like losing the only safe place I had ever known. The funeral was small but full of people whose lives he had touched, former patients who remembered his kindness, neighbors who knew him as the older gentleman who shoveled other people's driveways during storms, veterans who shared stories about his service. They spoke of him in a way that made my heart ache, as if they, too, had lost a father figure. When they handed me the folded American flag from his service, I held it so tightly my fingers went numb. After the funeral, I met with his attorney, a calm man named Richard Crane, who had known Dr. Hart for more than 20 years. He invited me into a quiet office with oak shelves filled with heavy books. He waited until I sat down before pulling out a brown folder and placing it gently on the table. "Emily, your father left behind a will." My throat tightened. I had never thought about his finances, never imagined he had much beyond his pension and the modest savings he kept for emergencies. He lived simply, never bought expensive things, never acted like a man with wealth. Richard opened the folder and read the formal statement, his voice steady and respectful. "To my daughter Emily Hart, the child of my heart and my home, I leave my entire estate. $5.5 million held in various accounts and investments." I blinked. The words did not register at first. $5.5 million. I shook my head, convinced I had misheard. Richard repeated it, then explained that Dr. Hart had invested wisely during his military career and continued to invest after retiring. He lived far below his means because he wanted to leave something meaningful behind for me, something that would allow me to build the future he always hoped I would have. My hands trembled in my lap. I did not feel joy or excitement. I felt grief crash into me all over again. The idea that he had been quietly preparing a financial safety net for me made my chest ache. He had given me love, stability, a future, and now, even in death, he had given me a final protection. The attorney explained the trust structure, the bank accounts, the property deed transfer, and the legal steps required to finalize everything. I barely heard the details. My mind kept replaying his voice, remembering the times he told me he wanted me to have more than he did, that he wanted me to be safe long after he was gone. After the meeting, I walked back to my car in a daze. Snow had started falling again, soft flakes landing on my jacket. I sat behind the wheel and let the weight of everything settle. $5.5 million. A fortune that did not feel like mine. It felt like a piece of his love that he had shaped into something tangible. I whispered into the empty car. "Thank you, Dad." I thought that would be the end of it. I trust grief and the slow process of learning to live in a world without him. But grief and inheritance have a way of pulling shadows from the past, and in my case it pulled the darkest ones. Because the moment the local paper published a small article about a retired military doctor leaving his estate to his adopted daughter, the people who had abandoned me at 10 years old saw an opportunity. And that was when the nightmare began. The article about Dr. Hart's will appeared 3 days after the meeting with his attorney, printed in a small local column that most people would skim without much thought. It was a short piece, barely more than a paragraph, mentioning a retired military doctor who had dedicated his life to serving others and left his entire estate to his adopted daughter. There was no mention of the amount, but the reporter had included a line about long-term investments and careful planning, which was enough for anyone determined to read between the lines. I did not care about the article. I had not even planned to read it. But someone else did. Someone who had once walked away from me without a second glance and now saw my name printed in a way that made their greed sharpen like a blade. The first person to see it was Linda. She was sitting in the worn recliner in their dim living room, scrolling through her phone, while Kyle and Thomas argued loudly about overdue bills. Their house looked nothing like the one from my childhood. Half the blinds were broken, the carpet was stained, and the kitchen counter was covered with stacks of unopened mail. The physical decay of their home mirrored the decay of their lives, but none of them stopped long enough to admit how far they had fallen. When the headline caught her eye, Linda froze. Her thumb hovered over the screen as she read the article once then, again her breath quickening as the realization took root. Emily, the daughter who vanished from their lives 24 years ago. The girl they convinced themselves had been taken into the system and forgotten. The child they abandoned without hesitation. Her voice cracked through the living room. "Thomas! Kyle! Look at this!" Both men turned annoyed and uninterested until she thrust the phone into Thomas's hand. He squinted at the screen, his lips curling slowly into a crooked half-smile as he read the name, the story, the reference to an estate. "Well now," he muttered, glancing at Linda with raised eyebrows. "That is interesting." Kyle snatched the phone from him and skimmed the article so fast he nearly dropped it. His eyes narrowed. "Adopted daughter," he scoffed. "You mean they let her take everything?" His jealousy ignited immediately the same way it had when we were children, and he hated seeing anyone else get attention. He paced the room, running a hand through his unkempt hair. "This is wrong," he said. "She does not deserve any of that." Linda sat up straighter, her eyes bright with a mix of disbelief and greed. "Thomas, if we play this right, we could file something, some kind of claim." He leaned back and rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "She was our daughter. We could argue that he manipulated her to cut us out. We could say we never gave consent." Kyle scoffed. "Consent? You dumped her in a store, Mom." Linda glared at him but did not deny it. "We can fix that," she snapped. "We can say she wandered off. We can say we reported her missing and the state failed us. You really want to throw away $5 million because we are afraid of a little revision?" Kyle stopped pacing. His face hardened into the same expression he wore whenever he wanted something badly enough to justify anything. $5 million. He repeated the number slowly, letting it simmer. His heartbeat quickened. His frustration with his life, his failures, his debts, all crystallized into a single target. Her. He stepped toward his parents. "That money should have gone to me. Dad always said I would take care of the family someday. If she got that money because she tricked him or guilt-tripped him, then it is our responsibility to take it back." Thomas nodded approvingly, his ego inflated by the idea of reclaiming something he had not earned. Linda leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "She is not even really his daughter, and she would never have had anything if we had not brought her into this world. She owes us." Their conversation spiraled from greed to strategy. Thomas suggested contacting a lawyer who had once helped him dodge a small fraud charge. Linda talked about framing Dr. Hart as someone who preyed on vulnerable families. Kyle proposed they accuse me of manipulating a grieving old man for financial gain. None of them expressed an ounce of guilt. Not one of them mentioned what they had done to me. Not one of them acknowledged leaving a 10-year-old child in a Walmart aisle and driving away. Instead, they built a narrative where they were the victims, where I was the ungrateful traitor who dared to move on. By nightfall, they had convinced themselves they had a real claim. By morning, they were sitting in the office of a desperate attorney willing to take money up front to craft a complaint filled with lies. The language of the lawsuit painted a picture of a loving family torn apart by an outsider. They claimed Dr. Hart had manipulated them into losing custody. They claimed they never intended to abandon me. They claimed I had taken advantage of a lonely old man. They claimed Kyle had suffered emotional distress from losing his sister. They even inserted a line suggesting that Dr. Hart had isolated me from them. Every sentence was designed to rewrite history. A few days later, while I was preparing dinner at my apartment, there was a knock at the door. A process server handed me a thick envelope with the words, "Notice of Civil Action," heavy across the front. I barely made it to the sofa before my legs gave out. I tore the envelope open and scanned the pages, my vision blurred. My hands shook violently. My heart pounded like it was trying to escape my chest. I reread the first paragraph again and again, each sentence ripping at old wounds I had spent years healing. My parents, who had not spoken my name in decades, were suing me for the inheritance Dr. Hart had left out of love. They claimed I owed them $5.5 million. And with that single lawsuit, the nightmare I thought I had left behind 24 years ago came roaring back into my life. The knock at my apartment door came just after 6 in the evening. right when the sky over Denver had turned a deep purple and the chill from the mountains pressed against the windows. I was still wearing my navy scrubs, exhausted from a 12-hour ER shift, and I had been looking forward to nothing more than reheating leftover soup and falling asleep on the couch. Instead, that knock shattered every ounce of calm I had. It was too firm, too formal, too deliberate. I froze in the middle of my small kitchen spoon halfway to the bowl as the knock came again. "Miss Hart," a male voice called. "I have legal documents for you." My stomach dropped. The spoon clattered into the bowl, splashing broth across the counter. I walked slowly toward the door, each step heavy, my nerves buzzing like exposed wires. When I opened it, a man in a windbreaker stood there holding a large envelope. He was polite but businesslike, almost apologetic as he held out the papers. "Emily Hart, these are for you. You have been served." He turned and walked away before I could ask anything. The hallway felt colder than usual as I closed the door. My hand trembled around the envelope, the weight of it unnatural and threatening, as if it carried something toxic. I sat on the couch staring at the thick packet for several long seconds, unable to bring myself to open it. Eventually, with a deep breath that barely made it into my lungs, I tore the seal. The first page alone sent a shock through my body. A civil complaint filed by Linda and Thomas Hart claiming emotional suffering, loss of familial connection, exploitation by a third party, and financial damages amounting to $5.5 million. $5.5 million. The same number Dr. Hart had left me out of love, trust, and gratitude. The same number my biological parents now believed belonged to them, simply because they shared my blood. My eyes burned as I continued to read. The document portrayed them as victims of a manipulative adoptive father who had stolen their daughter, convinced the state to sever their parental rights, and robbed them of the chance to raise me. They alleged that they had spent years searching for me, filing reports, begging for updates, only to be misled and ignored. They even claimed they had intended to bring me home, but had been prevented from doing so by a man who brainwashed a vulnerable child into hating her real family. Every line felt like a knife twisting into old wounds. I had lived the truth. I remembered the cold aisle in Walmart, the sound of the door chime as my mother disappeared from view, the fear that swallowed me when she did not return, the officer who crouched down to ask me for my name, and the realization the next day that no one had come to reclaim me. And now they were rewriting the entire story. I flipped through page after page, my chest tightening as I reached the section titled Claims for Damages. The accusations escalated with each paragraph. They argued that losing me had fractured their family. They accused me of exploiting Dr. Hart. They claimed my inheritance had been obtained through manipulation. They insisted the money was rightfully theirs and that my refusal to surrender it was selfish and immoral. By the time I reached the signature page, my vision was blurred with tears. I dropped the papers onto the coffee table and covered my face with both hands, trying to steady my breathing. But it was no use. Memories I had buried long ago came crashing back with every heartbeat. The loneliness of being 10 years old. The nights I cried myself to sleep in the foster intake center. The first days with Dr. Hart when I was too afraid to speak. The gentle patience he used to help me find safety again. It all collided with the brutal reality that the people who had abandoned me without hesitation were now claiming they had been the ones wronged. A wave of nausea hit me so hard I stumbled to the bathroom. I braced myself against the sink, gripping the porcelain as my reflection wavered in the mirror. My face looked pale eyes, wide lips trembling. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, my breath coming in sharp, shallow bursts. I turned on the faucet and splashed cold water onto my face, trying to ground myself. But the panic kept rising. They had found me. They had returned. Not because they cared. Not because they wanted me. Not because they regretted what they did. They had returned for the money. For the fortune Dr. Hart earned through decades of sacrifice and service. For the life he helped me build. They wanted to take all of it. I walked back into the living room, forcing myself to pick up the documents again. Near the bottom of the stack was the court date. It was only 6 weeks away. 6 weeks to prepare for a battle I never asked for. 6 weeks to defend myself against the people who had once looked me in the eye and decided I was disposable. My hands shook again as I set the papers down. I sank into the couch, pulled my knees to my chest, and let the quiet of the apartment close in around me. All I could think was how Dr. Hart had warned me. If they return, do not let them take anything from you. At the time, I thought he meant my peace, my dignity, my heart. I never imagined he meant everything. As the room dimmed and my exhaustion deepened into a hollow ache, one truth settled painfully into my bones. The lawsuit was not just a legal threat. It was a message. They had abandoned me once. Now they had come back to try to destroy me again. The night after receiving the lawsuit felt like slipping into a darkness I had not known since childhood. I moved through my apartment like a silent shadow, unable to sit, unable to stand still, unable to breathe, without feeling a sharp pressure beneath my ribs. I tried to distract myself by cleaning the kitchen, organizing my bookshelf, folding laundry, but my hands kept shaking so badly that I dropped everything I touched. Every corner of the apartment seemed colder, harsher, as if the walls themselves were closing in. When I finally forced myself to lie down, hoping sleep might calm me, my mind refused to quiet. Images from the past and present tangled together in a suffocating loop. The Walmart aisle, the cold fluorescent lights. The moment I realized my mother had not just stepped away, but left me. The officer asking me if I knew where my parents were. The process server handing me the lawsuit, the lies in the complaint, the accusation that I had manipulated Dr. Hart, the demand for $5.5 million. I kept hearing their voices. Kyle's sneer, Linda's cold dismissal when I was a child, Thomas's heavy disapproval, all of it mixed with the sickening knowledge that they had returned for one reason only: money. I curled onto my side, clutching my pillow as a wave of fear hit me so hard I gasped. The sensation was terrifyingly familiar. My chest tightened, my vision blurred, and my hands went numb. I recognized it immediately. A panic attack. I tried the breathing patterns we teach patients in the ER, but my breath kept catching in my throat, my body fighting every inhale like it was drowning. I sat up abruptly, pressing a hand to my sternum. My heart thudded wildly, too fast, too loud, as if trying to break free. I stumbled to the kitchen and leaned against the counter, gripping the edge until my knuckles turned white. The pain in my chest spread to my shoulders, and for a moment I thought something was seriously wrong. Maybe it was a heart attack. Maybe the stress had finally snapped something inside me. I forced myself to sit on the floor, knees to my chest, and I counted slowly. 1, 2, 3, but my breath refused to steady. I tried again. 4, 5, 6. My mind kept replaying the words from the lawsuit. She manipulated him. She owes us. Emotional distress. Financial damages. $5.5 million. By the time the panic finally eased, nearly 20 minutes had passed, leaving me drained and trembling. I crawled back to bed, but even when the attack subsided, exhaustion did not bring peace. It only left room for memories. I remembered being 10 years old and sitting in Dr. Hart's living room during my first night in his home, wrapped in a blanket while he gently told me I was safe. I remembered being 14 and asking him why my parents had never tried to find me. He had looked at me with such quiet sadness before saying that some people do not know how to love, and that their failure did not define my worth. I remembered being 17 and crying in his arms when I received my acceptance letter into the nursing program, overwhelmed that someone believed in me enough to celebrate. I remembered being 22 and watching him age slowly and painfully while he still insisted on attending every milestone in my life. And I remembered his last words to me: "If they return, do not let them take anything from you." He had not been warning me about anger or heartbreak. He had been warning me about this exact moment. I pressed the heel of my palm against my eyes, trying to stop the tears building again. This hurt in a way I had no words for. It was betrayal layered on top of abandonment, smothered with greed. I felt small again, powerless, as if the strong, capable ER nurse I had become was only a mask, and the scared 10-year-old was still trapped inside me. At some point, I drifted into a restless sleep, but nightmares tore through it. I dreamed I was standing in the Walmart aisle again, calling for my mother. I dreamed the lights flickered, and instead of returning to me, she turned away and walked into darkness while Kyle laughed in the distance. I dreamed Dr. Hart reached for me through a glass wall I could not break. I woke up screaming. My throat felt raw. Sweat soaked the sheets, and my hair clung to my face. For a moment, I did not even recognize my surroundings. The familiar outlines of my apartment blurred into something unfamiliar, hostile. My first instinct was to run, even though there was nowhere to go. I swung my legs off the bed and pressed both feet to the floor, grounding myself. The hardwood was cool beneath my toes. I repeated my name until my voice steadied. My name is Emily. I am 34. I live alone. I am safe. But the truth was, I did not feel safe at all. After pacing the apartment for several minutes, I sank onto the couch and buried my face in my hands. I wanted Dr. Hart. I wanted his voice, his reassurance, his unwavering belief that I mattered. The apartment felt unbearably empty without him. I pulled the box of old letters from under the coffee table. Inside were cards he had written me over the years. Birthday notes, graduation letters, holiday messages. I reached for the last one he ever wrote. My hand trembled as I unfolded it. His handwriting was shaky, but the message was clear. You are stronger than your past, and you are not alone. I pressed the paper to my chest and closed my eyes. Slowly, something shifted inside me. Not calm, not strength. Not yet, but a decision. I would not let them rewrite my life. I would not let them take what Dr. Hart left me. I would collapse tonight, yes, because the weight was unbearable. But in the morning, I would stand, and when I stood, I would not fall again. The morning after my collapse felt like waking from a long fever. My body was heavy, my eyes swollen, and my thoughts sluggish, but beneath the exhaustion was something steadier than the panic that had consumed me. It was not confidence, not yet, but determination, thin and fragile like a thread pulled tight. I knew I could not fight this alone. I needed help. Real help. Someone who understood the law better than my biological parents understood their own children. The court date was only 6 weeks away. Every minute mattered. I brewed a pot of coffee I barely tasted, forced myself to shower, and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open. Searching for a lawyer felt overwhelming. Denver had hundreds each, with polished websites and promises of experience. I clicked through pages until my eyes blurred, reading reviews, scanning credentials, looking for someone who seemed grounded, steady, and unintimidated by messy family dynamics. Eventually, I found Jason Miller, a civil litigation attorney in his early 40s with a reputation for dealing with complex family disputes. His clients described him as patient, calm, and relentlessly thorough. Something about those words made my chest loosen slightly. I dialed the number. His receptionist answered and told me he had a cancellation that afternoon if I could come in. I said yes before she finished the sentence. By the time I pulled into the small brick office in downtown Denver, my stomach was twisted with nerves. I sat in the waiting room staring at my hands until the door opened and a tall man with dark hair glasses and an unhurried presence walked toward me. "Emily Hart," he said, offering a hand. "Come on back." His office was warm, lined with books and framed certificates. He waited until I sat before asking anything. His quiet patience unnerved me not because it was harsh, but because it reminded me of Dr. Hart. It took everything in me not to break into tears again. "Tell me what happened," he said. "Start from wherever you need to." I opened my folder, pulled out the lawsuit, and began to tell him everything. The abandonment, the Walmart aisle, the years with Dr. Hart, his death, the inheritance, the ambush in the parking lot, the lawsuit served at my door. I spoke carefully at first, uncertain how much to reveal, but Jason kept listening without interrupting, and eventually the words began to flow, pouring out faster than I could control. When I finished, he leafed through the complaint slowly, his expression not shocked, but deeply focused. After several minutes, he set the papers down and let out a breath. "Emily," he said, his voice steady, "they do not have a legal leg to stand on." Relief washed over me so quickly my eyes stung, but Jason raised a hand gently. "That does not mean this will be easy. They can drag this out. They can create noise. They can try to muddy your reputation. They can attempt a settlement strategy based on stress." His eyes met mine. But legally, they abandoned you. They forfeited all parental rights when they chose not to reclaim you. Their complaint is based on fabrications. We can prove that." My chest tightened again, but this time with something closer to hope. "What do we need to do?" I asked. "First, he said we gather evidence. Everything we can. Records from Child Protective Services, reports from the officers on duty the night you were found, foster intake files, medical exams, any documentation Dr. Hart kept. If we can obtain security footage from that Walmart even incomplete, we will use it. Next, we need to establish their motive. Financial issues, gambling records, employment history, anything that exposes why they suddenly want $5.5 million from you." He leaned back. "And we also document every contact they have attempted with you, especially the incident in the parking lot." I swallowed hard. I have a bruise from when Kyle grabbed me, and there were witnesses. Did anyone record it? "Not that I know of," I said, "but someone yelled at him to stop." Jason nodded. "We will subpoena any CCTV footage from the hospital parking lot. Even if it does not show the whole thing, it may capture enough." He reached for a legal pad and began making notes, rapid but precise. I watched him work, stunned by how quickly he moved through each step, how confidently he dismantled the lies my parents had constructed. For the first time since the lawsuit arrived, the crushing weight on my chest eased by a fraction. When he finished writing, he closed the folder with a soft thud. "Emily," he said, his tone gentle but firm, "the truth is on your side, and truth when documented properly is extremely difficult to fight." The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours, and by the end of it, I had signed a retainer agreement and handed over every document and piece of information I had. Jason stood as I prepared to leave. "One more thing," he said. "They will try to provoke you. They want you emotional, unstable, reactive. Do not give them that. Speak to them only through me. Protect your peace as fiercely as you protect your case." I nodded, though a knot remained in my stomach. On the drive home, the city lights blurred past my window as I replayed his words. The truth is on your side. But truth alone had never stopped my biological family from causing damage. They had abandoned me once without remorse. They had returned with even less. When I reached home, I gathered the letters from Child Protective Services, the documents Dr. Hart had kept, and all the files from my early years. I spread them across the table, each page a painful reminder, but also a piece of armor. For the next several hours, Jason and I exchanged emails as he began building the foundation of my defense. By midnight, I sat alone in the quiet of my apartment, surrounded by papers that told the real story of my life. It hurt to see it all laid out, but it also strengthened something inside me. I had survived the abandonment. I had survived the fear. I had survived the loss of the only father who ever loved me. And now, I would survive this too. As I gathered the papers and returned them to their folders, I whispered the promise aloud, my voice soft but steady. "You will not take anything from me again." The confrontation with Kyle did not happen the way people imagine court dramas or family conflicts unfolding in neat, controlled moments. It came suddenly on a cold Saturday morning when I stepped outside my apartment complex to throw away trash before heading to an early shift. The sun was barely up, the air sharp with winter frost, and the parking lot was quiet, except for the hum of a distant leaf blower. I did not expect anyone to be there. I did not expect danger. But danger had always worn Kyle's face anyway. He stood near my car, leaning against the driver's door as if he owned the space. His arms crossed, his expression a mix of irritation and smug satisfaction. My stomach dropped so fast I nearly stumbled. "How did you find me?" I said, my voice tight. He shrugged in that careless way he always used to. "Internet. Public records. Not that hard when someone has been in the news." I froze several feet away, keeping distance instinctively. His eyes scanned me slowly, critically, as if he were evaluating property he believed he was entitled to. "So this is how you live now," he said. "All grown up, educated, comfortable. Thanks to a man who should have left that money to your real family." Heat rose up my neck. "You are not my family, Kyle. You forfeited that when you abandoned me." He rolled his eyes with a sharp, annoyed sigh. "You keep using that word abandoned like a weapon. It is pathetic, Emily. You got lucky and you know it. Without him, you would be a nobody." I felt my jaw clench. He took a step toward me. I took a step back. Kyle smiled like he enjoyed the fear that shot through me even though I tried hiding it. You know, he said, jabbing a finger toward me, Mom and Dad are trying to fix this the right way, but you are making everything harder. We need that money, and honestly, it should have been mine from the start. My breath shook. That money is not yours. It was never meant for you. It was from Dr. Hart's life, his choices, his sacrifice. Kyle scoffed loudly. Sacrifice? You mean he manipulated a lonely kid who already hated her real family? I felt the sting of his words, but anger began building beneath my fear, slow and hot like a rising current. Do not talk about him, I said quietly. He is the only person who ever saved me. Kyle stepped closer, the space between us shrinking too quickly. You owe us, he growled. You owe me. I took another step back, but my heel hit the curb, stopping me. That tiny loss of balance was all the opportunity he needed. He reached out and grabbed my arm, fingers clamping down hard enough to make me gasp. Pain shot up through my shoulder. Let go, Kyle. Now. But he squeezed tighter, dragging me a few inches toward my car. I tried pulling free, but his grip only tightened. You think you can walk away from this, he hissed. You think you can ignore us and live your happy little life. You cannot. That money will come back to the family. My panic shot up my spine. My breath quickened. The familiar helplessness I thought I had buried years ago came roaring back. The parking lot was empty except for a few cars. No one was outside. No witnesses. I pushed at his arm with both hands, but he jerked me forward again, my shoulder screaming with pain. I said, "Let go!" I shouted, but my voice cracked. He moved his face close to mine, his breath sour with stale coffee and anger. You are nothing without us. You are nothing without me. In that moment, something inside me shattered, not from fear, from clarity, from the certainty that Kyle would keep hurting me over and over until I drew a line so bright he could never cross it again. Mustering strength I did not know I still had, I twisted the way Dr. Hart once taught me for safety, pulling my arm inward against his thumb. His grip broke for a fraction of a second. I stumbled backward, gasping. Kyle lunged at me again, grabbing my coat and yanking me forward so hard I nearly lost my footing. He raised his other hand, not in a punch, but in a furious, uncontrolled gesture meant to intimidate. But intimidation spilled into violence just the same. I cried out and the sound finally drew attention. A door creaked open from the second floor. A neighbor stepped onto her balcony just as Kyle tugged at me, her eyes widening. Hey, stop! Leave her alone! She held up her phone immediately. I am recording. Kyle froze. His grip loosened. His entire expression shifted from anger to panic. Let go! I said again louder, my voice steadier. He did. The neighbor kept recording her voice sharp. I am calling the police. Kyle backed away, eyes darting from me to her phone. You are going to regret this, Emily, he spat. You always ruin everything. He turned and jogged across the lot, disappearing between parked cars. My legs nearly buckled when he was gone. I leaned against my car, gasping for air, my arm throbbing where he had grabbed me. The neighbor hurried downstairs and asked if I was okay. I nodded through trembling breaths, thanking her repeatedly, though I could barely speak. She stayed with me until the police arrived, her phone still recording her compassion grounding me. When officers took my statement, they gently examined my arm, noting the swelling and redness. They reassured me they would pull footage from the apartment security cameras. Before they left, one officer said quietly, You did the right thing, calling this in. People like that do not stop unless someone forces them to. After they drove away and the parking lot returned to silence, I finally unlocked my car door and sat inside, gripping the steering wheel as tears spilled freely down my cheeks. I cried for the fear. I cried for the violence. I cried for the 10-year-old version of myself who had no one to protect her. And I cried because I knew one thing with absolute certainty now. This was no longer just a lawsuit. This was survival. This was war. The days leading up to the court hearing felt like living inside a tightening circle, every rotation bringing me closer to a moment I had spent my whole life trying to avoid. After the second attack, Jason moved fast. He filed a police report on my behalf, submitted photos of the bruises, and immediately notified the court of harassment and witness intimidation concerns. Meanwhile, he increased our preparation sessions from once a week to nearly every day. I spent more hours in his office than in my own apartment, surrounded by documents, printouts, and old case files that pieced together the real story of my childhood in ways that were both painful and liberating. Jason wanted the courtroom to see everything, not just the abandonment, not just the lawsuit, but the full truth of who my biological family had been for decades. Truth that did not need embellishment because it was already devastating. On the first morning of preparation, Jason placed a stack of files on the desk between us. "Emily, we are going to reconstruct the timeline of your life from age 10 to now. Every official record, every verifiable detail, everything that shows your parents never made a single attempt to reclaim you." His voice was calm but firm. "Their entire complaint hinges on the claim that they never intended to abandon you. We are going to dismantle that with evidence so clear the judge will not have to guess." He opened the first file. CPS intake records from the night I was found. I had never seen them before. Not fully. I felt my throat tighten as he slid the first page toward me. My name, my age, my condition. The officer's notes describing how I had been shaking, how I said my mother told me she would be right back, how she never returned. Then came the attempts made by child services to reach my parents. 3 calls that went unanswered, 2 home visits, a mailed notice, a note on the file stating the home had been vacated, and finally a report from the state confirming parental rights had been terminated due to abandonment. My hands trembled slightly as I read. Jason noticed. "We can take breaks if you need to." I shook my head. "No, I need to see all of it." Over several days, we went through school enrollment records, pediatric health forms, showing Dr. Hart listed as guardian from the beginning therapy notes describing trauma responses consistent with abandonment, and years of documentation proving that my biological parents had never reached out. Not once. The lie in their lawsuit grew more grotesque with every page of truth. Next came the financial analysis. Jason had hired an investigator who uncovered everything. Their debts, their gambling losses, their fraud charges, their tax liens, their pattern of short-term employment. It was a mountain of evidence showing motive as clearly as any confession. They needed money, and they saw me as a solution. The day Jason handed me the investigator's report, he tapped one line with his pen. "This is crucial. It shows Kyle withdrew nearly $7,000 in 1 month for gambling. It shows Thomas defaulted on 2 personal loans, and Linda had been caught stealing from the medical office where she worked." He leaned back in his chair. "Their claim of emotional suffering will crumble in seconds when the judge sees this." But the most powerful evidence was the video. The neighbor who recorded Kyle's attack emailed the footage to Jason's office. Watching it made my entire body tense even though I knew it was no longer happening. In the video, Kyle grabbed me, yanked me forward, and shouted directly into my face. The neighbor's voice was clear, calling out for him to stop. The moment she said she was recording, Kyle stepped back, looking both furious and afraid. It was painful to watch, but it was undeniable. Abandonment in the past, violence in the present, motive in the middle. Jason watched the video beside me, his jaw tightening. "This is the kind of evidence judges remember," he said. "This shows who he is, who they are, and it shows exactly who you are." I looked at him confused. He motioned toward the screen. "Even scared, even cornered, you did not retaliate. You tried to get away. You tried to protect yourself. That matters, Emily. It matters more than you know." For the final stage of preparation, Jason outlined how the hearing would unfold. He explained what questions I would likely face, what traps their lawyer might set, and how to stay steady under pressure. "You will not be explaining your entire life," he told me. "You will be speaking to one thing only, the truth, the real truth. You survived all of this and built a life anyway. You have nothing to be ashamed of in that courtroom." But the hardest part of preparation was not legal. It was emotional. It was the knowledge that the courtroom would not be private. Jason told me their lawyer intended to push for media coverage, believing public attention would pressure me into a settlement. He warned me that the judge might allow observers. My biological parents wanted humiliation. They wanted spectacle. They wanted to twist the story again in front of an audience this time. The thought of standing in front of them after all these years with strangers watching made my stomach churn, but Jason looked me straight in the eyes. Public exposure does not hurt the innocent when the evidence is this strong. It only hurts the guilty, and we will make sure the truth reaches every corner of that room. On the night before the hearing, I laid out my clothes, folded Dr. Hart's last letter, and placed it inside my purse. I sat on the couch, the lights dimmed the apartment quiet, and I whispered the words he once told me. You are stronger than your past. But this time I added my own. They may have abandoned me, but they will not define me. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, letting the day settle. Tomorrow the world would hear the truth, and for the first time it would be my voice telling it. The morning of the hearing, the courthouse felt colder than the Denver winter outside. I walked through the security checkpoint with my hands trembling despite gripping my purse tightly. My heart thudded in my ears, each beat echoing the truth that this day was years in the making. When Jason and I stepped into the courtroom, the murmur of voices hit me first. Reporters lined the back row pens, poised eyes watching. My biological parents sat at the plaintiff's table, dressed in clothes that were too formal for their usual lives, pretending to be the image of aggrieved parents searching for justice. Linda dabbed her eyes with a tissue she did not need. Thomas kept shaking his head dramatically as if the weight of unimaginable grief rested on his shoulders instead of decades of poor decisions. Kyle sat behind them with his arms crossed, jaw clenched, and a fresh bitterness in his eyes. He refused to look at me, but his presence felt like a storm cloud gathering at the edge of the room. Jason placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. Remember what we prepared for. Do not respond to them. Let the truth do the work. The judge entered the room, stood, and the hearing began. Their attorney rose first, a tall man with an oily confidence and a voice trained to sound wounded on behalf of his clients. He painted a picture of a heartbroken family torn apart by a manipulative outsider, a man who had allegedly stolen me away from my loving parents and poisoned me against them. He spoke of emotional devastation of a family who had searched tirelessly for their daughter only to discover she had been taken in by a wealthy man who brainwashed her. Every sentence, every word twisted my story into something unrecognizable. I felt anger rising beneath my ribs, but I kept my expression steady the way Jason had instructed. Their lawyer went on to claim that Dr. Hart had exploited a vulnerable child and that I had unfairly inherited a fortune that rightfully belonged to my biological family. He ended his opening with a sweeping gesture toward Linda and Thomas, who both dramatically wiped away tears. When he finished, Jason rose. His presence, though quieter, filled the room with a steadiness that felt like a lifeline. Your Honor, he began, we do not need to argue emotion today. We will simply present evidence, and the evidence will reveal the truth that has been buried for 24 years. He walked toward the judge's bench with a calm confidence that made the entire room shift its attention. First, he introduced the CPS intake report. With every detail he read aloud, the courtroom's illusion of a grieving family began to unravel. The judge's eyes narrowed when Jason highlighted the officer's notes about unanswered phone calls, the abandoned address, and the termination of parental rights. Linda shook her head frantically and mouthed something to her attorney, but Jason continued unbothered. Then he presented the pediatric intake records that showed no attempt from my parents to regain custody. He followed with therapy notes documenting trauma consistent with abandonment. The courtroom grew quieter with each page. The first cracks in their narrative appeared when Jason displayed the timeline of my first year with Dr. Hart, showing medical appointments, school enrollment, and consistent guardianship filings. If my parents had been searching for me, they would have found me. They had not. The judge leaned forward, reading each page carefully. Their lawyer stood abruptly, objecting that the documents were being taken out of context, but the judge overruled him without hesitation. Jason waited for the room to settle before pulling a small thumb drive from his folder. Your Honor, we also have video evidence relevant to the plaintiff's claim that they were acting in good faith and had no intent to harm Ms. Hart. He connected the drive to the courtroom monitor. The moment the footage appeared, the air in the room shifted. The recording from my apartment parking lot showed Kyle grabbing me, yanking me forward, shouting in my face. The neighbor's voice was clear. "Stop! Leave her alone! I am recording!" Gasps rippled through the room. Linda covered her mouth with both hands as if she had been struck. Thomas looked at Kyle with disbelief, his face twisting from anger to embarrassment. Kyle's jaw tightened. He stared straight ahead, but his foot tapped rapidly, betraying his nerves. Their lawyer lunged to his feet, shouting that the video was irrelevant to parental abandonment 24 years ago, but Jason calmly countered, "It is relevant to character, Your Honor. It is relevant to motive, and it is relevant to the plaintiff's ongoing pattern of intimidation of my client." The judge allowed it. The moment the video ended, silence fell like a weight across the courtroom. Jason stepped forward again. "Now, Your Honor, we present financial records showing motive." He placed the investigator's report on the evidence table. Thomas's defaulted loans, Linda's workplace theft investigation, Kyle's gambling withdrawals. The reporter in the back row leaned forward, scribbling furiously. Their attorney tried to object, but the judge held up her hand. "Sit down." For the first time since I entered the courtroom, I felt my breath ease. The truth was finally beginning to surface piece by piece, stripping away their performance and exposing every lie. Jason turned to the judge with a final statement. "Your Honor, this case is not about a loving family seeking justice. It is about a family who abandoned a child, ignored her existence for decades, discovered she later inherited money, and returned to take what never belonged to them." His voice sharpened. "Today, we will show the truth they have tried to bury." The courtroom was utterly silent as the judge nodded. "Proceed." And with that single word, everything shifted. The real unraveling had begun. When Jason stood and announced that he had one final piece of evidence to introduce before calling witnesses, the room tensed as if everyone instinctively sensed that something irreversible was about to happen. My biological parents stiffened in their seats. Kyle leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with suspicion, his foot tapping frantically beneath the bench. Even the reporters lifted their cameras higher, anticipating something more explosive than the parking lot footage. "Your Honor, Jason said we have managed to obtain archived security footage from the Walmart store in Fort Collins dated December 4th, 1999. The air thinned instantly. Linda's hand jerked upward to grab Thomas's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. Their lawyer shot to his feet, panic flickering across his face as he stammered an objection about relevance, about time, about degradation of old footage. Jason calmly responded. "This footage directly supports our claims regarding abandonment and directly contradicts the plaintiff's allegations that they never intended to leave their daughter." The judge considered this for only a moment before saying, "Show it." The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the monitor flickered to life. The footage was grainy time, stamped the colors muted by age, but it was clear enough. There I was, 10 years old, a tiny girl in an oversized purple jacket standing in the toy aisle holding a cheap plastic snow globe and looking toward the entrance as if waiting for someone who promised to come back. The courtroom fell silent except for the soft hum of the projector. Jason froze the first frame. "The timestamp shows 6:41 p.m., he explained. This was within minutes of the plaintiffs entering the store with the minor child. The footage resumed. Linda appeared first, drifting into the frame with a distracted expression, glancing at her watch before bending down to tell something to the child version of me. Even from the poor quality image body language spoke louder than sound ever could. She was impatient, cold, ready to be anywhere else. Jason hit pause again. This is the moment the plaintiff claims she told her daughter to wait only 2 minutes while she used the restroom. He pressed play. Instead of heading toward the restroom, Linda walked directly toward the exit doors. Thomas stepped into frame next, grabbing her arm and pulling her faster. They both looked around as if checking to see whether anyone was watching. Then, without hesitation, they walked out of the store. Out of the frame. Out of my life. The courtroom reacted as if a collective breath had been sucked from the room. A murmur spread like a shockwave. Reporters began scribbling furiously. The judge leaned forward, her expression hardening. Jason let the footage play further. The 10-year-old me looked around confused. I held the snow globe close as if afraid even it would vanish. I waited and waited. The footage sped up as Jason narrated quietly. This is 7 minutes after initial separation. This is 12 minutes. This is 22 minutes. The camera switched angles as store associates passed me, unaware that I had been abandoned. The timestamp reached 7:14 p.m. when a Walmart employee finally approached my younger self. He knelt down, speaking kindly, trying to understand. Another employee joined him. They walked me toward the customer service counter, and even on the low-quality feed, I looked terrified. Jason paused again. The plaintiffs did not return. The judge's gaze was sharp. "Please continue." The footage jumped forward as 2 police officers entered the store around 8 p.m. They scanned the aisles, questioned workers, examined the exterior. They attempted to contact the parents using the phone number on file. No answer. They attempted again. Still no answer. At 8:36 p.m., officers escorted me out of the Walmart and into a patrol car. The moment was quiet on the screen, but seeing it as an adult made something deep inside me ache. Little me sat in the back seat, clutching the snow globe like a lifeline. Jason's voice was steady as he addressed the court. This recording was stored in archival servers due to an unrelated incident that occurred later that month. We obtained it legally through cooperation with the Walmart corporate office. He turned to the judge. This is the truth of what happened, not the story written in the plaintiff's complaint, not the fiction they have rehearsed for this courtroom. This is the moment they chose to walk away. Silence. Heavy, sharp, unforgiving. Linda suddenly lurched to her feet, her face pale, her voice shaking. "This is not right," she cried. "This is edited. This is wrong." Thomas grabbed her hand, trying to pull her back down, but Linda pointed at the screen with trembling fingers. "We did not leave her there. This is not how it happened." But her voice cracked under the weight of her own lie. Their attorney scrambled to object again, claiming the footage lacked audio context explanation, but Jason remained composed. "Audio is unnecessary when the plaintiffs visibly leave the minor child and drive away," he said. "Context is unnecessary when they never returned." He approached the bench and placed the CPS documents alongside the video timeline. "These records match the incident exactly. The police report filed that night confirms the parents were unreachable, their home vacated. The state investigated. Custody was officially terminated." The judge looked over the documents carefully, then lifted her gaze to Linda and Thomas with an expression so cold it made even me shiver. The truth was undeniable now. The courtroom erupted again, reporters whispering, spectators shaking their heads, some even gasping at the cruelty displayed in the footage. Kyle sat utterly still, his jaw locked, his face draining of color as he realized their entire case had just collapsed in front of everyone. Jason nodded respectfully toward the judge. "Your Honor, this footage speaks louder than any argument. It shows willful abandonment. It shows decades of lies. And it reveals exactly why the plaintiffs returned only after learning of the inheritance." He turned to face the courtroom. "The truth has been recorded all along. The lies only survived because no one had seen it until today." The judge lifted a hand for silence. Order. And at that moment, as the monitor went dark, every false narrative they had built, every accusation, every fabricated tear shattered in the face of a truth that could not be rewritten. If the Walmart footage cracked their story, the next phase shattered it completely. The judge's face was still stern from what she had just witnessed when Jason stepped forward again, stacking several documents neatly on the presentation table. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm but sharpened with purpose. "We now turn to the plaintiff's motivations, patterns of conduct, and history of actions that directly illuminate not only why this lawsuit exists, but the lengths they have gone to manipulate the narrative." Their attorney shifted uncomfortably, already sensing the avalanche coming. Linda leaned back, clutching her tissue like a shield, while Thomas's jaw flexed in silent panic. Kyle sat rigid, his foot tapping so violently it shook the bench. Jason lifted the first document. "This is the plaintiff's financial record for the past 10 years. He handed copies to the judge and opposing counsel. Screenshots appeared on the monitor. Bank statements, overdraft notices, maxed out credit cards, a foreclosure warning, Linda closed her eyes as the judge skimmed the pages, her expression tightening with every line. Jason pointed to a highlighted section. Here is a record of Mr. Hart defaulting on a personal loan of $22,000, and here is documentation showing he received a wage garnishment order 4 months ago. He flipped to another page. Mrs. Hart was investigated for theft at her former workplace. That file was closed after she resigned, but the details are on record. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Linda sank deeper into her seat. Jason did not pause. "And this, Your Honor," he said. Tapping the next page shows gambling withdrawals made by Kyle Hart, totaling nearly $7,000 over a single month. The camera caught Kyle stiffening, his face turning red as reporters scribbled notes with renewed vigor. The courtroom whispered. Every lie they had built was now eroding faster than they could defend it. But Jason was not finished. "Financial motive is only one part," he continued. "Now we address the plaintiff's behavior toward my client throughout her life." The monitor flashed again. CPS reports. Termination of parental rights. Caseworker notes stating no attempts were made to contact the child after removal. The same officer's report the judge had already reviewed earlier now took on an even heavier weight as Jason read out a line from it. The biological parents did not respond to 3 calls and 2 mailed notices. Their address was vacant. The minor child was declared abandoned. Linda sobbed softly, but it was not the soft sob of remorse. It was the panic of someone watching their final mask tear. Thomas stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, refusing to face anyone. Jason continued. "The plaintiffs argue they intended to reclaim their daughter, but this file proves that no effort was made, not even a single inquiry. Not in 1 year, not in 5 years. Not in the 24 years that passed before they learned of the inheritance." Their attorney stood abruptly. "Objection, Your Honor. This is character assassination. We have already argued intent." Jason did not even turn. "There is no assassination when the person's own actions reveal the truth." The judge nodded slowly. "Overruled. Proceed." Jason's composure never wavered. Next, he presented employment records showing years of instability, unpaid taxes, and a narrow timeline proving that the lawsuit was filed only 5 days after the inheritance story was published. 5 days. That detail drew a loud murmur from the back row of the courtroom. Reporters leaned forward, recognizing the headline waiting to be written. Jason lifted one final folder. "And now, Your Honor, we address the plaintiff's ongoing pattern of harassment." He clicked the next video. The courtroom monitor lit up with the footage from my apartment parking lot. The same violent confrontation the judge had seen earlier, but now juxtaposed with the Walmart video, the financial records, and the CPS reports, the scene took on an even darker clarity. Kyle grabbing me, shouting at me, threatening me, my neighbor's voice fearless as she filmed him. The judge watched the entire recording, her expression unreadable but unmistakably stern. When it ended, Jason spoke softly. "This is not a case of a family seeking justice. This is a case of a family who abandoned their daughter, ignored her existence, returned when there was money to gain, and physically assaulted her when she refused to surrender what they believe belonged to them." The judge turned her gaze slowly toward the plaintiffs. "Mrs. Hart, Mr. Hart, do you have any explanation?" Linda's voice cracked as she stood, her face blotchy, her fingers trembling around her wrinkled tissue. "We were struggling," she whispered. "We lost everything. We thought maybe she could help us." The judge's brows furrowed. "By suing her for $5.5 million." Linda broke into sobs, leaning on Thomas, who stared down at the floor as if it might swallow him. Their attorney tried to recover, stepping forward to salvage what little remained. "Your Honor, my clients admit to financial difficulties, but they believed their daughter was taken from them. They believed the judge cut him off. The video shows them leaving her. The CPS files show they never attempted contact. The assault video shows their son attacking the defendant." She turned to Kyle. "Stand." Kyle hesitated before rising, his posture stiff and defensive. "Is there anything you want to say regarding the video evidence?" He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Not an apology, not an explanation, not even denial. Only silence. The judge nodded once curtly. "Sit." The air felt thick electric. every lie they had tried to tell had fallen apart under the weight of proof. Jason stepped back beside me. His voice was soft, meant only for me. "This," he said, "is what truth does." For the first time since I had walked into the courtroom, I felt something close to relief settle over my ribs. Not full relief. Not yet. But the first breath of it. The unmasking was complete. All that remained now was the verdict. The courtroom held a tense silence as Judge Reynolds rose from the bench, her robe flowing behind her like the weight of decades of experience and authority. She adjusted her glasses, scanning the room with eyes that seemed to pierce through the smoke of deception and fear lingering in the air. Emily sat at the defense table, heart-hammering hands clasped tightly around the edge, her knuckles white, but her posture unwavering. Jason leaned slightly toward her, a quiet reassurance, a reminder that they had presented the truth with precision, with patience, and with evidence that could not be denied. The gallery, filled with a mixture of journalists, friends, and curious spectators, leaned forward, instinctively sensing the magnitude of the moment. Even the plaintiff's attorney straightened, though his confidence had long since eroded under the avalanche of irrefutable proof. The judge cleared her throat, and the sound echoed sharply, commanding attention, demanding order. After careful review of the evidence, witness testimony, and all exhibits presented over the course of this trial, the court reaches its decision. She began, her voice calm, yet carrying an unshakable authority. She paused, allowing the gravity to settle across every face, every person present, every microphone capturing the moment. The claims brought forth by Linda and Thomas Hart against Emily Hart regarding inheritance, wrongful adoption, and alleged manipulation are hereby denied in full. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the gallery. Emily's chest tightened with a strange combination of relief and lingering adrenaline. The words she had dreamed of, prayed for, and rehearsed mentally for weeks were now being spoken aloud by the person entrusted to deliver justice. The court finds that the plaintiffs acted with malicious intent, filing claims without factual basis, with the sole purpose of coercing their daughter for financial gain. The judge's eyes scanned the room, locking on Linda and Thomas. Their faces were pale, and Emily noticed the slight tremor in Thomas's hand as he gripped the edge of the plaintiff's table. Kyle, sitting rigid beside them, looked frozen, unable to comprehend the full weight of the ruling. Furthermore, the judge continued, the court acknowledges the documented assaults and threats carried out by Kyle Hart against the defendant as part of this campaign to intimidate and pressure her. An order of protection is hereby issued, restricting contact from Kyle Hart for a period of 5 years. Kyle's lips parted slightly, a gasp caught in his throat, while he remained seated, staring blankly at the floor. Linda's hand flew to her mouth, her tissue shaking, tears glinting on her cheeks, not from remorse, but from shock and humiliation. The judge did not flinch. In addition, the court finds that the plaintiff's actions have caused measurable emotional distress, reputational harm, and financial burden upon the defendant. As such, the plaintiffs are jointly and severally liable for damages in the amount of $350,000, with additional court costs totaling $42,000. The room collectively exhaled. Some of the spectators whispered some scribbled notes furiously, while the journalists' cameras clicked and flashed, capturing the exact moment justice had been articulated. Jason squeezed Emily's shoulder subtly, a silent acknowledgement of the victory. Yet he knew this was only the first step in reclaiming full peace for his client. The plaintiffs, meanwhile, appeared utterly paralyzed. Linda's mouth opened and closed with no sound, while Thomas's fingers trembled uncontrollably as he attempted to adjust his tie. Kyle's head tilted slightly backward, eyes wide, and he made no move to protest. The judge's voice cut through, deliberate and unwavering. The plaintiffs have demonstrated a pattern of neglect, abandonment, and opportunism over decades. The defendant, Emily Hart, was legally adopted, nurtured, and raised with love by Dr. Henry Hart, and any attempt to contest the inheritance based on false claims of manipulation is hereby dismissed with prejudice. The court expects full compliance with this judgment, and any future attempts to harass, intimidate, or defraud the defendant will result in immediate legal consequences. Emily's breathing was shallow at first, then gradually steadied as the enormity of the words sank in. Relief, vindication, and a profound sense of closure washed over her in waves. The nightmares of her childhood, The trauma of the recent confrontation in the parking lot, the terror she had felt facing her brother's aggression, the legal threats from her biological parents, all of it now had a formal, undeniable end. Jason quietly added, "Your Honor, we request the court to note the comprehensive nature of evidence presented, including eyewitness testimony, documented neglect, financial motives, and the assault incident, which together demonstrate the malicious intent of the plaintiffs beyond reasonable doubt." Judge Reynolds nodded solemnly. "The court records will reflect the full extent of evidence considered. The judgment stands." The plaintiff's attorney looked as if he had aged decades in minutes, his once commanding presence reduced to a man grappling with helplessness. The gallery began to stir, the initial shock giving way to applause and murmured conversations praising the clarity and fairness of the verdict. Emily's sister Rachel, sitting quietly beside her, leaned over whispering, "You did it. They can never hurt you again." Emily allowed herself a small, genuine smile, the first since the morning she had received the process server's papers. She looked toward Kyle and saw the confusion and anger etched deep into his face, but she did not flinch. The law had protected her, the truth had prevailed, and justice had been delivered. She felt a surge of gratitude for Jason for the careful preparation and for every piece of evidence that had been preserved to ensure this exact outcome. The media buzz intensified as reporters scribbled their headlines capturing not only the injustice of the past, but the triumph of today. Cameras flashed and microphones were thrust toward the plaintiffs, who made no statements, choosing instead to retreat in stunned silence. Emily, however, turned to her sister and Jason, feeling an inner peace she had never imagined possible. She realized that the court's decision was more than legal vindication. It was symbolic. It was the final barrier preventing those who had discarded her from ever wielding power over her life again. The weight of 34 years of abandonment, fear, and uncertainty lifted, leaving only clarity and a quiet strength. She felt the presence of Dr. Hart in every breath, his choices having preserved not just her life, but her dignity and autonomy. As the courtroom began to empty, Emily lingered, taking a final look at the plaintiffs. They had been stripped of their claims, their illusions, and their capacity to hurt her further. She did not feel glee or vengeance, only the deep satisfaction that comes from truth prevailing over deceit, love and care over abandonment, courage over intimidation. Her story, once defined by loss, had been rewritten by resilience, by the power of evidence, and by the unwavering commitment of those who stood beside her. Today, the court had recognized her worth, her right to her inheritance, and the profound injustice of the past. It was a victory not just for her, but for every child who had ever been abandoned, overlooked, or undervalued, a testament to the power of choice justice and the unassailable truth. And with that, Emily Hart stood taking her first steps out of the courtroom as a free, empowered, and vindicated woman. The moment the courtroom emptied, Emily remained seated for a few minutes, allowing the adrenaline and relief to settle into her chest. Outside, the winter sun was beginning to rise over Denver, casting pale light across the streets and the courthouse steps. She watched as reporters clustered around the plaintiff's table, shouting questions, waving microphones, and snapping photos, but no answers came. Linda and Thomas Hart slumped in their chairs, their expressions blank, their pride and dignity stripped away in full view of the world. Kyle, still rigid from the judgment, refused to speak, his jaw locked tight, eyes darting nervously from one camera to another. The legal consequences were only the beginning. Emily knew the ripple effects would extend far beyond the courtroom. Within days, the news of the trial had spread nationally. Headlines screamed betrayal, abandonment, greed, and justice. Parents who abandoned daughter face. Humiliation in court ran across several online outlets. Social media exploded with commentary, with thousands expressing outrage over the cruelty and audacity of the plaintiffs. Public scrutiny was relentless. Local television stations broadcast the security footage of 10-year-old Emily left in the Walmart aisle, juxtaposed with the court's ruling and clips of the confrontation in the parking lot months earlier. The footage made the story impossible to ignore, and the Hart family quickly became infamous. Linda Hart lost her part-time position at the grocery store where she had worked for over a decade. Management cited public attention and customer complaints as the reason. though it was clear that reputation alone had rendered her unhireable in the small community. Thomas Hart faced the same silent condemnation. His habitual visits to the local casino were curtailed not for legal reasons, but because the establishment wanted no association with someone publicly known for exploiting a child. Rumors of financial instability and moral failings spread rapidly, and former friends, neighbors, and even distant relatives began severing ties, leaving the family isolated. Kyle, once the golden child, spiraled further. His job prospects vanished as word of the trial spread through professional networks, and the restraining order limited his movements. 1 week after the verdict, a separate incident involving Kyle assaulting a coworker in a heated argument led to police intervention. The legal system moved quickly, partly because his reputation had already been tarnished and his history of aggression documented during Emily's trial. He faced charges of assault and harassment, reinforcing the court's decision and ensuring his behavior was formally addressed. The impact of the verdict extended into the financial realm as well. The $350,000 judgment plus court costs imposed an insurmountable burden on the Harts. Their home, already underwater with existing mortgage obligations and poor credit, was threatened with liens. Any assets they might acquire in the future would be subject to garnishment, and their ability to rebuild financially was effectively destroyed. The plaintiff's attorney Preston faced his own scrutiny. Colleagues whispered about his handling of the case, the public embarrassment, and the ethical questions raised by representing clients motivated purely by greed. He retreated from public appearances and quietly reassessed his career trajectory, shaken by the unmistakable lesson that the law is no friend to deception and malice. Emily, meanwhile, felt a mixture of relief, vindication, and a strange discomfort at the intensity of the public reaction. She had wanted justice, yes, but not spectacle. Yet she understood that the exposure of the Harts' actions was a necessary step not only to protect herself but to prevent them from attempting similar manipulation in the future. Her sister Rachel remained by her side throughout, offering quiet companionship. Together, they navigated media inquiries, interviews, and the growing attention from organizations focused on child welfare. It became clear that the story resonated because it reflected the harsh realities of favoritism, neglect, and the long shadows such choices cast on victims. Emily also spent time reflecting on the personal consequences for the Hart family beyond legal and financial repercussions. She realized that public disgrace, social exile, and the inability to manipulate or control anyone else were the natural outcomes of a life built on cruelty and deceit. She felt no joy in their suffering, only the steady satisfaction that justice, both legal and moral, had been served. Over the following weeks, Emily continued to monitor the fallout. Linda attempted to regain employment but found doors closed, applications ignored, and past neighbors refusing to speak to her. Thomas faced mounting pressure from creditors and ongoing legal oversight due to his gambling and financial mismanagement. Kyle remained under supervision, attending mandated counseling and reporting his movements to law enforcement due to the restraining order and pending assault charges. Emily observed the slow unraveling of the family from a distance, satisfied that the consequences were proportional and permanent. The court's intervention had protected her, and the public exposure ensured that the Harts could not manipulate, intimidate, or claim any moral authority again. Meanwhile, Emily focused on her life, her career in the ER, and her growing role with the Richard Hart Foundation. She witnessed firsthand how turning trauma into purpose could heal both herself and others. She reflected on how Dr. Hart's guidance and protection had enabled her to not only survive abandonment, but to thrive, transforming past pain into a platform for advocacy and compassion. Emily also took moments to privately acknowledge the profound psychological relief that came from knowing her abusers could not re-enter her life financially or emotionally. The verdict and the public reckoning had created a barrier that would remain effective indefinitely, ensuring she could maintain autonomy and safety. She recognized that the aftermath was not just punishment for the Hart family, but a reaffirmation of her worth, her strength, and her right to live free from the shadow of neglect and exploitation. In the quiet of her apartment, Emily allowed herself to sit back and breathe deeply, feeling the tension of months, even years of fear and anxiety, slowly release. The consequences faced by her parents and brother were undeniable, inescapable, and guasquiet. They had tried to profit from her life to rewrite history and to intimidate her into submission, yet the system, her preparation, and the truth had ensured that justice was achieved in full. The knowledge that the villains she had feared, those who had once held power over her, were now powerless, socially ostracized, financially constrained, and legally barred from harming her again, provided a sense of closure that was complete, measured, and undeniable. Emily finally allowed herself a moment of emotional release, tears mingling with a smile, knowing that the nightmare of confrontation, the second wave of abandonment, and the threat of exploitation had been permanently ended. She knew that from this moment forward, she could move forward without fear, supported by the truth, the law, and the people who had chosen to stand with her. The heart's reckoning was complete. They had faced the consequences for every lie, every act of neglect, every moment they had attempted to manipulate and intimidate. Their chapter had ended, and Emily could finally continue hers unburdened, empowered, and free. Emily stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of her newly purchased apartment, watching the soft glow of the Denver skyline at dusk. The city lights twinkled like distant stars, and the winter air carried a crispness that made her lungs feel alive with each breath. For years, she had carried the weight of abandonment, favoritism, and betrayal, and yet here she was, finally unshackled from the shadows of her biological family's cruelty. The Richard Hart Foundation had become her sanctuary, her mission, and her bridge from trauma to purpose. The office was now fully operational, staffed with dedicated professionals who shared her vision of protecting and supporting children who had been abandoned, neglected, or overlooked by the world. She reflected on the foundation's growth, on how in just a few months, the initial seed of her inheritance had blossomed into programs providing mentorship, therapy, and educational support for dozens of children. Every day she witnessed lives change because someone chose to intervene just as Dr. Hart had chosen her. That choice had been the cornerstone of her life, the pivot from despair to empowerment. Emily's thoughts drifted to Rachel, her sister by choice, who had become her closest confidant and collaborator. Their bond, forged in shared pain and fortified by mutual respect, was a source of constant comfort and joy. Together, they had navigated the treacherous waters of public scrutiny, legal battles, and personal healing, emerging stronger and more resilient. Rachel had taken on the role of education director for the foundation, designing trauma-informed curricula and developing outreach programs that allowed children to feel seen, valued, and loved. Watching her sister teach, mentor, and nurture had reminded Emily of the power of chosen family, the people who decide to stay, to protect, and to love unconditionally. Emily's days in the ER remained demanding, often chaotic, and emotionally taxing, yet they were profoundly grounding. Saving lives, witnessing human vulnerability, and providing care under pressure gave her a tangible sense of purpose. The juxtaposition of her professional life and the Foundation's mission created a rhythm of resilience and healing. She could confront human suffering both medically and socially, and she felt capable in a way that years of fear and abandonment had never allowed. One evening, as snow fell lightly outside, Emily reviewed the letters she had received from families and children supported by the Foundation. The heartfelt words of gratitude, the drawings from children who now felt safe, and the notes from foster parents expressing relief and hope all reminded her of the tangible impact of her work. She realized that the inheritance that her biological parents had tried to seize for their own gain had become a tool for empowerment, for justice, and for the protection of those who, like her, had once been powerless. The past was no longer a chain. It had been transformed into a lever, enabling her to lift others from despair. Evenings were often quiet, with Rachel beside her at the dining table or the Foundation office as they finalized program plans or simply shared stories of the day. These moments were filled with laughter, understanding, and the simple, unforced companionship that Emily had never experienced with her biological family. She often thought back to the Walmart parking lot that night at 2:17 a.m., to the cold, the fear, and the aggression of Kyle, and she shivered, not from trauma, but from the realization of how far she had come. Emily now understood that the strength to survive, the ability to stand firm in the face of cruelty, and the courage to build a life of meaning were the true legacies left to her. Not money, not recognition, but resilience, love, and purpose. One particularly quiet morning, Emily sat at her desk reviewing applications for a new counseling program. A knock at the door interrupted her focus, and she looked up to see a young girl no older than 7 clutching a small backpack. Her eyes were wide with uncertainty, and her posture was hesitant, almost frozen. Emily recognized immediately the same fear she had felt as a child left alone in the toy aisle. Kneeling to meet her at eye level, she smiled warmly, letting the girl see that she was safe, that someone was there to protect and guide her. "Hi," Emily said softly. "Are you cold? Would you like some hot chocolate?" The girl nodded almost imperceptibly. Rachel arrived shortly after carrying a thermos with warm cocoa and a few cookies. Together, they created a cocoon of safety and acceptance, allowing the child to begin the slow process of trusting again. Watching the girl relax into the Foundation's care, Emily felt a profound sense of continuity. The cycle of abandonment that had defined her early years was now being broken, replaced by a legacy of protection, choice, and love. The very foundation of her life, Dr. Hart's decision to take her in the survival she had fought for, and the courage to confront her biological family, had now been amplified to benefit countless others. Emily also took deliberate time for personal reflection. She revisited the journal Dr. Hart had left her, reading passages that recounted his worries, triumphs, and unconditional love. His words reminded her that life is measured not just by survival, but by the choices one makes to protect, nurture, and uplift others. With each page, she reaffirmed her commitment to embody the principles he had instilled: courage, compassion, and unwavering integrity. Social media and news coverage of the Foundation continued to grow, but Emily no longer feared public attention. She understood that visibility could be harnessed for good to attract resources, volunteers, and advocates who shared her vision. The story of her childhood, her survival, and her rise to a position of influence became a beacon, a narrative illustrating the transformative power of love, choice, and justice. On a quiet afternoon, Emily sat by the window sipping tea, reflecting on her journey from a terrified 10-year-old abandoned in a parking lot to a 34-year-old woman leading an organization that changed lives daily. The emotional weight of her past no longer constrained her. It had been transmuted into empathy, purpose, and a fierce commitment to ensure that no child felt as she once had. She thought about her biological parents, briefly acknowledging the closure brought by the court and the public reckoning that had finally held them accountable. There was no satisfaction in malice, only the quiet relief that the cycle had been interrupted, that the people who had wronged her could no longer influence her life or her legacy. Emily knew that healing was ongoing, but it was now proactive rather than reactive. She chose daily to engage with life fully, to nurture the vulnerable, and to act as the guardian she had once needed. Standing from her chair, she walked to the front door of her apartment, pausing to look at the Denver skyline once more. She whispered to herself, affirming the life she had fought to reclaim. "They abandoned me once. They tried to destroy me again. But I walked out stronger because the family you choose is more powerful than the family that throws you away." A small, contented smile crossed her face as she stepped out into the crisp evening air, ready to face the world with purpose, courage, and the knowledge that her life, her choices, and her love had created a legacy that no cruelty could ever diminish. As you reflect on Emily's journey from the moment she was abandoned at 10, left to face the cold, indifferent world of a shopping mall, to the years of love, guidance, and protection she received from Dr. Hart, to the moment she stood strong in the courtroom facing the people who once discarded her, it's impossible not to feel the weight of what it means to survive, to persevere, and to reclaim your life on your own terms. This story is not just about one woman. It is about the power of resilience, the courage it takes to confront betrayal, and the strength that emerges when you refuse to allow someone else's cruelty to define you. Have you ever faced a moment in your life when the people who were supposed to protect and love you let you down? Perhaps it was a family member, a friend, or a mentor who failed you when you were most vulnerable. Think about how Emily must have felt standing in that parking lot at 2:17 a.m., cornered by her parents and brother, realizing that their love was conditional, that their concern was motivated by greed and favoritism. And then consider the stark contrast of her later life, nurtured by someone who chose her, who invested in her safety and happiness, not because of obligation, but because of recognition of her worth. That juxtaposition, the pain of abandonment and the warmth of chosen love, reminds us all that the people we select to be in our lives, the communities we build, and the choices we make in cultivating relationships are what truly shape our resilience and sense of belonging. Now, I want you to pause and reflect on your own journey. Think about the people who have stood by you the moments when you chose courage over fear, kindness over revenge, and self-respect over submission. What would you have done if you were Emily faced with the stark betrayal of your biological family, but the opportunity to reclaim your power and defend yourself legally, emotionally, and morally? I encourage you to drop your location and local time in the comments and share your response. How would you confront a situation where the people who abandoned you now demanded a stake in your life or your hard-earned accomplishments? Your story matters, and your voice is part of the community we are building here. Beyond reflection, consider the lessons Emily's story teaches us about empathy, action, and using our experiences to make a positive impact. She turned her trauma into purpose, establishing a foundation for children in situations similar to hers, giving them the safety, protection, and love that were denied to her at the most critical time in her life. What could you do with your experiences? How might you help someone else who is navigating fear, loss, or betrayal? Sometimes, the most powerful response to hardship is to channel it into meaningful action that benefits others, to break cycles of neglect and to create environments where children, families, or communities can thrive despite the injustices that occur around them. By choosing to act, to reach out, and to offer support, you honor your own experiences while empowering someone else. And finally, I want you to remember this. You are defined not by the harm that has been done to you, but by the choices you make in response. You can allow past pain to weigh you down, or you can use it to fuel your growth, your compassion, and your impact on the world. Emily's story demonstrates the profound power of agency, the significance of chosen family, and the enduring impact of love, commitment, and courage. If her journey inspired you, if it made you reflect on your own experiences of abandonment, favoritism, or resilience, please consider subscribing to this channel to follow more stories of triumph over adversity. Share this story with someone who might need to hear that even when life seems unfair, even when the people who should protect you fail, you have the strength to rise, to fight back, and to create a life that reflects your true worth. Remember, you are never defined by the cruelty of others. You are defined by the strength, love, and choices you cultivate within yourself and the lives you touch. Thank you for watching, for reflecting, and for being part of a community that values resilience, justice, and the courage to choose yourself. Together, we can transform the stories of hardship into legacies of empowerment, hope, and undeniable strength.